A young life tragically cut short.
As somebody who's just 20 years old, a beautiful young lady.
Nearly 1 year after she vanished, 3 people are arrested in this Georgia woman's death.
They're alleging these gentlemen were, and this lady were, they took her from somewhere in Cobb County and then drove her 2 hours. It's 2 hours period to get up to Chattanooga area and then dumped her body up there. There's more to this story.
But still, there is no murder charge.
I mean, they know more, but they don't have enough yet to know what happened. But they wanted to make sure that they charged these 3 individuals. Like, we know something's going on here. We know you were involved with her death somehow.
And that's not the only puzzling aspect of the case.
We found the body in January, and then the mom gets told in May. What happened in those 5 months?
Here's everything we know so far about the case of Maury-Ange Martinez and where Georgia defense attorneys expect the case to go from here.
You know, there's a lot of murky things that I think ultimately more charges could ensue.
This case dates back to August 2023, when 20-year-old Maury was last seen. And from the jump, things are complicated. It was first reported that Maury was last seen northeast of Atlanta in Gwinnett County, being picked up from jail there. But later, investigators determined she was actually last spotted in Cobb County, northwest of Atlanta. These reports say she was last seen being picked up from a courthouse building. Then, months later, Maury's remains were found 2 hours away in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
It's multiple counties for sure, no matter what, because remember, she allegedly was last seen in Gwinnett County, leaving a jail. And then we have her then, for real, last seen in Cobb County. So that's already 2 counties. And then, yes, another state is involved. So it's multi-jurisdictional, period.
That's Georgia-based defense attorney Meg Strickler. She says the first part of the case that stood out to her was the timeline.
We found the body in January, and then the mom gets told in May. What happened in those 5 months? That's the part that we all know by watching TV, even crime scenes, CSI, whatever, that they probably ascertained something back in January. So how did it become so long to positively identify her in May? So that was the first thing that made me kind of go,
The last time she was seen was almost a year ago, in August of 2023. Then the remains are found in January, and it takes several months until she is positively identified, which you yourself just said, red flags there. So why might it have taken them so long to determine who the remains belong to?
I can guess. Again, I couldn't find anything out there on the internet to tell me otherwise, but maybe the remains were in such bad condition that they weren't able to, and it took a long time with what they were given. That's my only guess, and that probably is what happened. I don't know. I do know that the Georgia Bureau of Investigations is backed up. It's very difficult to get anything done because they're just backed up. And so they do prioritize these kinds of cases, period. But maybe it just took 5 months because of just the conditions of the remains and then bureaucracy, how long it takes to get things done here.
Law and Crime reported on the case for the first time back in May when Maury's remains were identified. For that story, we reached out to forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan. So the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically in this case is that the remains were found many months ago back in January, but were just now identified. Why would it take so long to identify who they belong to?
Well, you know, we think about in terms of skeletal remains. First off, if that's what we're dealing with, and it certainly sounds like that's the case here, they're going to be degraded to the point where there will not be any kind of recognizable features. And I'll give you, for instance, you know, the old days of people walking into a morgue and pulling the sheet back and seeing, you know, the face. Those days are certainly gone at this point. We rely very heavily on science in order to get people identified, specifically DNA now more so than in the past. Of course, coupled still with dentistry. But you want to be sure, and that takes time. People want to speed this process up, but it takes time. So my thought is that with the medical examiner's office, they were in fact taking their time to make sure all of their bases are covered. Because as sad as it is, there are more more people out there missing than anyone can possibly even fathom. And you don't want to just jump to a conclusion when it comes to ID. You have to be very, very careful. Wouldn't it be a tragedy if you misidentified someone and went and notified somebody's family and you didn't have 100% scientific surety with that?
After identifying Maury's remains, investigators came to a curious conclusion. Investigators are saying there's no signs of trauma or major injury. And I'm wondering, is that because there has been so much decay, or there just weren't signs of it at all?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The reality is this, is that once you're down to, our skeletal structure, when you think about, our framework, as it were, skeleton, we can learn a lot from it: age, sex, race, these sorts of things. But when it comes to soft tissue trauma, if we think about things like, say for instance, strangulation, we think about perhaps if someone was suffocated, or what if somebody overdosed? You're not going to have that sourcing information. It's gone. And you can have a fatal event that displays itself in the soft tissue, but yet there's not going to be any connectivity with the underlying bony structure. Say, for instance, if someone is in fact asphyxiated in some way, there's not going to be communication between the marks that we might, for instance, find on a neck, petechiae in the eyes. There's not going to be any kind of communication between that and the underlying skeletal structure. So it's not surprising that they would come to that conclusion over the course of my career working with skeletal remains. Most of the time, the investigators, the medical examiner even, you're kind of left scratching your head in the end.
So will that make it more difficult to determine how she died and whether anyone was involved? If there is in fact a suspect, could that make things even more tricky?
Yes. This route is fraught with unpredictable outcomes here. Because if you cannot move forward, as tragic as this case is, if you cannot move forward with something substantive, the DA that their hands are tied at this point in time. Because first off, what are you going to call this? The medical examiner, are they going to classify it as a homicide? Or will it be the big U, as we refer to it, undetermined? And that frustrates a lot of people. But you can't just willy-nilly just randomly say, oh yeah, well this was in fact a homicide, because you don't have anything scientifically to hang your proverbial hat on. And it's very frustrating for families as well, because they want to know. And in this particular case, unless they can find something in the underlying bony structures, and I'll kind of tell you how forensics plays into this. One of the things with careful examination that would happen is that those scientists, forensic anthropologists, for instance, that examine bones, they're going to be looking for things like tool marks, perhaps some kind of evidence of gunfire injury. And one more interesting point to this is that if the body has been down this long, to the point where skeletonization has taken place, unfortunately, you might have missing elements of the skeleton, and that can come about just in a natural process of scavengers in the animal world that show up, and it's very, very frustrating.
Beyond just the condition of Maury's remains, there was still the question of why she disappeared under such unusual circumstances. Her mom was actually supposed to go and pick her up. She was about 9 minutes away, according to her phone. She's about to get her daughter, and her daughter texts her and says, hey, I'm getting a ride from someone else. After that, she doesn't hear from her daughter again. She says that this is really out of character. Is that situation a red flag to you, or do you think it could be unrelated to her disappearance at all?
We have to consider where mom was going to pick her up, right? It's been kind of fuzzy, some of the reports that are coming out. But when you think about going to a criminal justice complex or to a courthouse area, this sort of thing, well, what's going on there? it's not like you're going, to the local flower club meeting or something like this, right? The chance that you're going to cross paths with someone that might not mean you well increases exponentially, I think, given this environment. Even if this poor young lady has no association with them, you never know who's coming in and out of a complex like this. And so, yeah, as an investigator, oh boy, I'd look at this long and hard. I don't think that it's necessarily a coincidence, perhaps. I don't believe in coincidences most of the time as a science guy. So that is an onion that the investigators will have to peel, and with each contact that they make there, relative to anybody that may have been there at that particular time, they have to press. There should be CCTV that's available within this complex and without. How does she just kind of vanish at this point in time? People don't just simply vanish. There's generally some kind of catalyst behind this. So, as an investigator, I take a long, hard look at that particular geographic location.
All this is just the precursor to 3 arrests that came just this month. What do you hypothesize happened between when the remains were positively identified to when 3 people are charged?
I can only guess again, it's an indictment. So maybe once they decide, okay, we have some real information here, to get that from here over to the DA's office to then be indicted took 6, 7, 8 weeks. I think that's a normal time frame. And there was no rush in that 2 of them were already in jail with no bond on other charges.
Investigators now say Alan Carr, Sean DeShauser, and Jasmine Craig were all involved with concealing Maury's death. Carr and DeShauser were already in custody on drug charges, and Craig was arrested in Kansas earlier this month.
Yeah, they're charged with concealing the death of another or something like this. And what that means, and I have it written here somewhere, is that they had messed with the dead body and moved her. They're not charged with murder as of yet.
In fact, it's still unclear the cause or manner of Maury's death. Do we even know how she died yet? Could that factor in because her remains had been discovered for so many months?
I'm gonna guess again, but when I was sleuthing on the internet, which all of us do, you can tell that the 2 gentlemen that were arrested, they were charged with trafficking, and they were charged with trafficking fentanyl and a gun, and those things are public record in Cobb County, and it shows these 6, 7 charges, and they have no bond. That was in October of 2023, and he was charged with obstruction. I believe the Alan person was Alan Carr, which means he might have run away when they went and found him. So that was in October of 2023. That's so close to the last time we saw her, which was August, that I would extrapolate that there was an issue with drugs with her. Also, there were some interviews with the mother who had said that we had thought when she got released from going to jail, she was going to go into a rehab, and instead went elsewhere, which kind of puts 2 and 2 together again, that she may have just OD'd. But that does not help, because you can still be charged with a crime. If I gave you fentanyl and you died, I can be charged with that, with causing your death.
So for now, all 3 suspects are only charged with concealing a death.
It just says that they have hindered the discovery of the remains. I made sure to look up the details because I was like, that's an interesting charge. I mean, they know more, but they don't have enough yet to know what happened. But they wanted to make sure that they charged these 3 individuals. Like, we know something's going on here. We know you were involved with her death somehow. And maybe they somehow know that they transported the body up to Chattanooga, and there's the hindering the discovery of her when she actually died.
That leads into my next question, because I know that Georgia is investigating because that was where she was last seen, but then her remains were found in Tennessee. So does that make things more complicated because we have multiple states involved?
Everybody's working together. I don't think it complicates things too much by having a neighboring state right across the border of Georgia, right into Chattanooga. I don't think that's going to complicate anything. I think technically how they got it to be charged in Cobb County for messing with the body, maybe they know more.
But it's possible more charges could be on the way for one or all 3 defendants. What would it take for prosecutors to jump from the charges of concealing a death to murder or in some way being responsible for her death?
My guess is getting phones, doing the Celebrite reports on the phones. These things are such a treasure trove. 50, 100,000 pieces of paper are extrapolated from this, which is all the images, the text messages, your GPS coordinates. Those are the most damning. And so those things are probably reports that are still coming in from the GBI and from the FBI, because when you do mention the two different states, the FBI obviously can now be involved because we're talking about multi-state jurisdiction. All of that will give us the evidence we need, if there is indeed evidence to prove that they were involved in causing her death.
But with 3 defendants, there's also the question of everyone's involvement in Maury's death. One of the things that jumps out to me right away is that we have 3 suspects who are involved right now. And that is sticky because we have 3 different people with 3 different levels of involvement. How do investigators kind of siphon through that and decide, or determine rather, who did what?
Well, again, the technology is going to tell us. I think also, as you probably have seen in many a case, it's this, these people may turn on each other. Also, I did not look up the person that was arrested in Kansas, Jasmine Craig. I don't know what her storyline is. Maybe there's less culpability because she's from far away. I don't know. And maybe they're arresting her with these other 2 to kind of say you're guilt by association. And then she may be like, well, I didn't do this. And then there might be some more information that she can give. And so when you're asking about levels of culpability, I think there's going to be some more of that, like I just said. But also, the laws are such that if you're committing a felony and a death occurs, it's felony murder. So, there's a lot of murky things that I think ultimately more charges could ensue. Also, the charges, if they all remain in Cobb, could ultimately blend together. I'm not saying that drug trafficking and this one are related, but maybe they are. These are things that if it goes federal, will most definitely be all connected.
We talked about them potentially turning on one another, and that gets me thinking about the potential for plea deals. Is that something prosecutors might be looking into to get more information about one defendant over the other?
400%. That's kind of sadly how all drug cases go, and I choked on it because I can't stand it. I can't stand every single client I have charged with trafficking. The first question I have to ask is, the prosecutor would like you to come proffer. Do you want to go turn on somebody else? And I hate having that conversation. And so 100% that is something that's going to be asked. That's going to be something that's already been asked because it's already a couple of months old. And so we don't know who's already spoken, who's already cooperated, who's already given information. And I guarantee somebody in a drug case, it's always the case, somebody talks.
With developments in the investigation, Strickler theorizes that new charges could be on the way and explains what that could look like. And we've talked about the potential of future charges being filed, maybe even down the line, felony murder. So what does that mean in Georgia?
25 to life. You're going to go to prison for a long time. And I don't really love the felony murder doctrine that we have here in Georgia. It's not, and we criminal defense lawyers are working to fix this here in Georgia. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here. I'm just saying that it's very possible. We have a death. We have drugs. We have, somehow hindering the discovery of these remains. That's kind of an already idea that's in the prosecutor's head. So there's more data that's going to occur. They just found the body in May of 2024. It's early to then quickly indict in July. So I do see a superseding indictment occurring. I think it's important to point out that somebody who's just 20 years old, a beautiful young lady, the fentanyl epidemic is dreadful. And I can tell you from experience that judges don't play. They will say, when they're looking at the case, they'll fiddle through their paperwork and they'll say, oh, this is fentanyl. And they'll be more harsh as a result. When they see that word fentanyl, they are always more strict on the punishments.
Even with a potential felony murder charge, Strickler's confident the longest sentence any defendant would face is life in prison. Does this sound like a death penalty case to you?
No, there's no circumstances, aggravated circumstances here that would warrant the death penalty. So I am pretty daggone sure there's no way it would come into this case.
What do you think, in your opinion, will happen? Whether it will go to trial or it could end in a plea deal?
Well, as it stands today, my guess is they have some information that's technologically oriented that shows these individuals moving the body. It could be as simple as the cell phone coordinates, the GPS showing, the car, the GPS on the cars. Who knows? But I have a feeling it's technologically oriented and then corroborated by cameras. The cameras on the roads, the cameras on the Citgos, the cameras on the Quick Trips, whatever. And so I have a feeling that part is probably provable and therefore not triable. I think what's going to be a triable is if they try to add more harsh charges. That's when it becomes a case that would be a jury trial.
With many questions still left unanswered, Strickler says detectives are likely still working the case. But is it possible that investigators would be able to determine for sure her cause of death, or we could simply maybe never know?
Those are things that, that you see on TV, the crime scene, CSI, I love watching those shows. And, it does mean how she was found, was she really just found in January? Was it earlier? We don't know. And the condition of the body and the forensics of what they can do, the coroner, are going to be pivotal on these cases. And then I'm also going to say, if this were to go to trial, the defense always hires another coroner to then look at the medical examiner's reports and say, okay, you got some of the stuff wrong. So there's still a whole lot more here that we don't know about, but also we got to litigate as time goes forward.
The investigation into Maury's death is still underway, and anyone with more information is asked to contact the Cobb County Sheriff's Office or Greater Atlanta Crime Stoppers. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie. And 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 I'm Sierra